This is Dr. David Perodin, and I want to thank you as we begin another journey into school and community safety. If you're looking for industrial safety expert, Appalachian State University professor Dr. Timothy Ludwig, please visit www.safety-doc.com. Again, that's Dr. Timothy Ludwig at www.safety-doc.com.
His sermon short because the parish leaves starts born on Sunday morning. Go to the snow side by each all in a row. Drive down to Lambeau, park the Pinto, fire up the rubber.
Welcome to the Safety Doc Podcast with author, radio host, and nationally recognized safety expert, Dr. David Perodin. Join us each week as we discuss the best and most bizarre practices in safety preparation and crisis response. Follow Dr. Perodin on Twitter at SafetyPhD. And remember, the truth will keep you safe.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. David Perodin, and welcome to this episode of the Safety Doc Podcast. I actually debated doing this episode with my winter coat on. It's chilly down here in the North Star studio. Temperature currently a brisk 58 degrees. Today's episode will focus on the 75% of the world which does not have an address. And there's a technology that's emerged. What 3 words? And it's taken the surface of the world, has divided it into 3 meter by 3 meter squares and has identified 3 words. So you can identify any location by 3 words. This is significant for safety in so many regards. For schools, reunification sites. For emergency responders, if you're out in a woods, or if you're just coming to an address, but it might be like a 500-acre farm or something like that. Where to specifically go. So many benefits to this technology. I want to get into it today. I learned about it just recently, and I think the impact that this is going to have, especially on school safety, will be tremendous. So right now, I am in the midst of the finishing touches for my manuscript, Lessons of Lower Manhattan, which talks about the rescue of 500,000 people from Lower Manhattan in 9 hours on September 11th, 2001. And this was all done by boat in the harbor. How did that happen? Why did it happen? What were the psychological factors that made that possible? And what were the 6 essential lessons we learned from that we can then take into the school safety environment? That will be submitted on January 31st. This is the final rewrite version, and then should be going to print early this spring. So very excited, and we'll focus a number of shows on that. I've already been asked to be on several shows to talk about Lessons of Lower Manhattan. So I was working last night on chapter 30, and in front of me I have chapter 30. So this piece of chapter 30 and this piece of chapter 30, and it's kind of falling down like confetti. And I broke it into subheadings and laid it all out. I took the entire chapter and cut out different sections, laid it out on my kitchen table, and then developed new headings and reorganized it. And that's sometimes the way that it works when you're putting together a book. Worked with a friend who did a reread on the introduction, which I had modified a few times. He had some suggestions for taking that part, putting it back together in a different way. So it's exciting. And there is a point, of course, with any work when you have to stop and say, this is what it's going to be. So it is a fascinating process right now. Collaborating with my editor. We're seeing the same things. Actually, we were editing simultaneously a paragraph, and it was just amazing how we kind of had this mind meld going on right now. So I'm feeling really great about it. And again, we'll talk about it. First, a shout out to the 405media.com, the 405 Media out of Los Angeles, California, a supporter of the Safety Doc podcast. You can listen to the Safety Doc podcast on the 405 Media, 2 p.m. PST daily, Monday through Saturday. So many other terrific shows on the 405 Media. Just check out the lineup at the405media.com. One show you'll find is the Clary Podcast. My friend Aaron Clary and the Clary Podcast follows the Safety Doc Podcast. You've got back-to-back power hours there at 2 and 3 p.m. PST, the405media.com. Also, a shout out to Sprigeo, Sprigeo, Sprigeo.com, the nation's leader in school safety threat reporting software, Sprigeo.com. So let's talk about, we are in Wisconsin, as in me. We don't have snow. It's no snow winter. So we're a third through January and we don't have snow outside. We've had a couple small snows, but it's warmed. Snow's melted. It's cold today. It's going to be cold over the weekend, 14, both on Saturday and Sunday, but no snow. So extremely strange. We've had moisture. We've had precipitation. We've had rain, but we just haven't had snow. And the snow that we did have lasted a few days. The kids went crazy on the sledding hill, then it's gone. But right now, my lawn looks like it would in late March. Partially green, not really growing, but it is definitely a different winter here in Wisconsin. I have a friend, Aaron Clary of the Clary Podcast, who has a home in Las Vegas. Was talking with Aaron last night, and he was sharing it was in the 60s, and he was enjoying time out on the golf course, 18 holes. So he does have the invitation for me to come down and meet up with him and go and see what I can do on the golf course. It's been a while, but I do need to take him up on that offer because I'm just not a cold weather person. I think I've shared that before. Grew up in Wisconsin, but no, I'm not a cold weather person. Will stock my fireplace with wood throughout the night, and every time I come down and take wood out of the fireplace room, I also have my bike stored in there. So a little bit of sadness. I want to be out riding, but let's talk about what 3 words. So you actually type that in. WHAT, the numeral 3, WORDS. What 3 words? What3words.com. You can find the website. They're out of Great Britain, but they spread around the world. And this is a absolutely fascinating company. So right here, originally from the music industry, What 3 Words CEO Chris Sheldrake identified the need for a better addressing system after bands and equipment constantly kept getting lost. So it was in March of 2013, he paired with another person with expertise in the geospatial industry, and they came up with What 3 Words and have rapidly scaled that since then. So I'm going to just pause at this point because I will be interviewing somebody from What 3 Words next week. And we had to coordinate because it's Great Britain and it's Central Time United States, the day we were going to do this and also the time. So one of us wouldn't have to be recording at 2 a.m. So I'm looking forward to that. This is the lead up. And really when I have that live recording for the podcast, I'm going to have them give the many examples of when they've used the software specifically for safety and where they see the software in the future, because I have some areas I think that it will go into. I know some things that they've already worked on. It's very much incorporated into the Netherlands safety response system. So I want to get a feel for what the future is for what 3 words. So years ago, I was trained as a firefighter and then actually went through a second training to maintain my certification. And I aced the classroom work. I was very good when we actually had to go out and do the field competencies also, but the classroom aced it. But except one part, and that was the Plat book, P-L-A-T, the Plat book. Basically, it's like a map, and it's just pages and pages in a book, and it would break up sections of land into quadrants. And this was useful if you had a wildfire, and you had to find out where you were going to access a road, and then how far you'd have to walk in, and what rivers, what water sources might be nearby. Things that typically don't have an address, right? So I struggled greatly at being able to read a Plat book. I never, ever mastered that. So the test would come back and I would do great on everything and then struggle on the Plat book. It wasn't intuitive. It was very difficult for me to look at that and then try to translate that into the environment that we were approaching, for example, with the fire apparatus. So you have these Plat books in the old days, and those things were around for maybe 100 years. And they're still there in some form, although we've experienced a lot of shifts in crisis response just in the last decade. Things that have kind of put the Plat book away for good. So let's talk about that. Search dogs. I had Jennifer Fritten on one of the first shows of the Safety Doc podcast, and she had a search dog, Serenade, and talked about being called in for missing persons. And so, we had maybe, again, a century of search dogs and search dog teams, really being augmented now by drones and maybe at some time being replaced by drones. Of course, dogs have an ability to identify scents that we can't replicate right now with other equipment. But we're definitely seeing this evolution of rescue, especially for missing persons, incorporate drones, because we can quickly cover a lot of area, and we have forward-looking infrared so you can get the heat signature. Things that, if you were to call in search dogs, it takes time. The handler has to leave typically their work site. They have to go home. They have to prepare the dog. They probably have, a go bag ready to go, but maybe they have to drive 2 hours. They have to meet up with their team. They have to get debriefed. Where if you have a drone, and you can get that drone up in the air within a few minutes, the person isn't going to be able to go that far. So you're going to be able to cover that distance in a drone, have a better likelihood of finding them. So we're seeing that right now, that drones have become kind of the initial phase in search and rescue, and then augmented by search dogs. And at some point, depending upon, when we reach this cross in technology, I think that's all going to be automated.
Thank you for tuning in to the Safety Doc Podcast with the nation's leading safety expert, Dr. David Perrodin, author, radio show host, university instructor, researcher, expert witness, and consultant. Powerful testimonials. Dr. Perrodin has a strong reputation as the go-to safety consultant, and he was still able to exceed our expectations. When we went looking for an expert in the field of crisis preparedness and prevention, David was the single person we pursued. Not easy stepping into the touchier subjects of life, but Dr. David pulls it off. Take a listen. Now, back to Dr. David Perrodin and the Safety Doc Podcast.
So we talked about the Platt book that gave me headaches, made me pull my hair out, made me crazy on my firefighting exams. They're a thing of the past for the most part. It's all become digital, and the maps have been downloaded. So even if the power goes out, even if you don't have access to cellular systems, you still can ping to a satellite and can still access the map on your phone or mobile device. So geospatial addressing and maps, people think about Google Maps of I can type in an address on a Google map and or coordinates, longitude and latitude, and I can find a location. And you can do that. If you type in an address, though, it'll bring you to, for example, the front of my house. The problem with that is that's only precise to a certain level. Let's say that I lived on a 500-acre farm. So this was the address. You wouldn't know outside of maybe, like here's the house, what other area specifically you would need to go to for a rescue. You would be able to identify those with the What 3 Words app, because remember, it's taking a 3 meter by 3 meter square all across the entire world. And it has assigned a 3-word identification to that square. So as long as you have that, you can get somebody within that 3 by 3 space. So we're talking 20 or 3 by 3 meters. So we're talking 3 meters, which would be roughly 9 by 9 feet, or 81 feet, basically the size of a dorm room is this block. Size of a college dorm room, at least when I went to college. So you're going to get someone right to that location. So What 3 Words is a global addressing system. It has divided the world into these 3 by 3 grids. It's very precise. It's easy to talk about, again, because you're going to have 3 words that are specific to that location. I'm going to give you a couple examples here in a minute. And those words never change. Even if that location, a different house gets built, if it becomes a field, if there is some massive, wildfire, which eliminates the roads and identifiable landmarks, you can still know exactly where you're at with the What 3 Words app, which is a free app. So imagine that. It's going to be the same 10 years from now that it is right now. It also has this cool feature where you can have it in your native language. We could have it in the United States in English, or you could have everything can be mapped out in different, has been mapped out in different languages. So you could switch to, a native language. If I go to a different country, it could be, it would be in their language, but I could also have it so that 3 by 3 area shows up in English. So it has this universal access, which is incredible. I was talking about access, universal access, accessibility, design. This was created with universal design in mind, because we think about memory, talked about positive recency, the Monte Carlo effect, all of those types of things. But we know that you can't remember that many numbers, and they broke up phone numbers. So they had 1, 2, 3 dash, and then the 4, so you could remember it. But you can't remember if somebody just throws you an address, or if they're throwing you coordinates, or whatever. That's too much information, especially in a crisis situation. But if they give you 3 words, and the words are designed to be unrelated, if you can memorize those 3 words, keep those 3 words, it streamlines the process. Words are better than numbers. We're going to talk about that. So here's an example. So it goes stout.slice.scorecard. And if you brought that up, that would actually bring you to a section of a pier that leads to a house. Okay. So if somebody had collapsed in that location, you could identify specifically where they were at. If a first responder is getting there and they need to, get down a hill with a stretcher and equipment and whatever, they know exactly where this location is. You can also give a 3-word address to an item. So let's talk about when that would make sense. Well, how about fire hydrants? Just in the last couple of years, the fire departments have started these pizza runs. I talked about this before, but it's a couple days a year when the fire department will partner up with local pizzerias and they will deliver pizzas in the community. It's done as a fundraiser, but the other part is so the firefighters become familiar with the roads in the community and then also identify the fire hydrants. So every time they make a delivery of a pizza, they have to identify the fire hydrants that they are passing. So again, it's this fun way to have the fire department interact with the community in what is also a training activity. But what if you took what 3 words and identified every single fire hydrant in your city, and you could immediately have that identified with that 3-word code, which is already assigned to that area. So instead of saying, well, it is over on Oak Ridge and it's up about 40 feet and whatever it is, boom, it takes you right to that location. So it's amazing. So the geospatial industry, or this addressing industry, you can imagine with Amazon and with sending out packages and the postal service, the importance of knowing where you are delivering things. And remember, 75% of the world doesn't even have an address, for countries, for government land and things like that. But I mean, if you are talking about areas like Haiti, this is incredibly, incredibly helpful in rural parts, for example, of the United States. So we will see an integration of this software with the Postal Service, with UPS, with FedEx, with Amazon before long, if it hasn't happened already. So I'll talk about that when I do the interview. So the geospatial industry is a $150 billion a year industry worldwide, $150 billion. I talked about school safety in my book in the United States as being a $3 billion industry, and that's grown to be a $3 billion industry of selling bulletproof glass and metal detectors and things like that. And that number is pretty shocking. But here we look at $150 billion. Again, we're talking worldwide, but the geospatial industry is wide open for enhancements. And just imagine if you had an increase of reliability in delivering packages by even 5%, or if things were 5% faster. It is absolutely attainable by using what 3 words. And by the way, I'm not being paid by what 3 words to promote the product at all. Nothing like that. I'm looking at this, I'm saying this is another step forward in safety. And I want to specifically talk about how this will impact school safety. So let us move on. Dun, 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 dun. So we talked about the Netherlands, and also the United Nations uses this app for emergency response. So it's already widely integrated into the Netherlands system. I want to go back into why words beat numbers. So if I'm giving you 3 words, which I had just given before, Stout Slice Scorecard. Okay, you can remember that. Stout Slice Scorecard. All right, Stout Slice Scorecard. Words beat numbers. Using words means that non-technical people can discover and understand a 3-word address more easily than a postcode or GPS coordinates. Imagine that. You're trying to type in GPS coordinates into your device. Good luck with that. Or even like addresses or the intersection of whatever street and whatever street. Well, maybe that has changed. The streets have been renamed, relabeled. Maybe there isn't access to those streets. So it's really just, again, words beat numbers. Stout Slice Scorecard. So this is always consistent addressing. Amazing when I thought about, the fact of how much our world has changed in the last 100 years. How much my community has changed since I've moved here in 2002. It's like, well, where the Walgreens was, that used to be a bowling alley, and there used to be whatever, and they tore that down, and so no matter what happens to the land, the code will still identify it. That's not going to change. If you have a massive tornado, if you have that devastates a town, like in Joplin, Missouri, just completely wipes it out. The 2011 tornado went through, just devastated this town of 50,000, where it was very difficult to tell what were roads, and everything was all strewn with debris. So this would immediately help you get your bearings when what you expect to be familiar is, as far as roads, street signs, things like that, all gone. Okay. And again, at night, trying to identify by landmarks, so much more difficult. So I'm going to throw something else out there. Cave.arrive.rider. It's probably a place you wouldn't mind being right now, because if you are there, that, my friends, is 81 feet of sandy beach in Los Angeles. So cave.arrive.rider. But imagine, again, you have this whole beach area. Somebody is having a medical event. You need to have emergency resources there. You have that specific location. Cave.arrive.rider. As far as universal access for safety equipment, it's often been created without considerations for ADA, leaving people with disabilities kind of out of the mix as it's been formulated, and then never seeking their input, and just not accessible. So if you're visually impaired, it's not accessible. So these are changes that are just incredible, because this has voice input. This also is with all of your wearable devices now, like with the watches and things like that. It's compatible. It's compatible with drones. That's been a struggle just in the last 2-3 years of having software that's compatible with drones, and even drones being able to communicate with each other. But now you have a system which is fully compatible with drones, compatible social media. So this has incredible interface capabilities. And it's exciting because I think software designed, like the 2013 and later, really understood that this was the way to design this universal design for access, of using the phones, of having, the voice input, the wearable devices, and everything like that. And we're really seeing technology now that has removed barriers for, so for people with disabilities, people with language disabilities. It has really come in. People with memory recall, things like that. This has really been a plus. So, what 3 words? Remember I talked about how if I took a trip to like China, what 3 words, how that system would work like in that setting. So 3-word address today will still be the same 10 years from now. So that cave.rider or cave cave.arrive.rider. Cave.arrive.rider would be still that plot of beach in Los Angeles. So the square size, it's consistent around the globe. It eliminates the need to switch between addressing formats or coordinate systems based on a country or industry sector. So it's standardized. It's amazing, folks. It is amazing. So I'm excited about this. I actually modified a chapter in my book to include a small section about how this type of geospatial addressing software will revolutionize the way that reunification is done in school disaster situations. So let's talk about that right now. So schools put a lot of time into reunification in their safety plans. I argue they don't need to be doing that. It's just not a productive investment of resources, of saying, if we need to evacuate the middle school or if we need to evacuate the high school, our evacuation site will be the church 3 blocks away, or will be whatever. And there is so much work that goes into finding these locations, and you have to have a set of keys to get to the location. And do you stock? This was a school district I had worked with, and they questioned, do we stock it with food, like MRE type things, like, meals ready to eat and extra blankets and stuff like that in case we had to go there. They've never evacuated ever, but there could be a time, right? So they were going through all of this, and they were so caught up in it. And I had to sit back and say, well, listen, you'd also have the Red Cross involved in, rescue situations. If you're stocking these places with, meals and things like that, you're going to have to make sure that you are checking and monitoring those, so they are consumed before they, expire. And I said, I just see this as so low probability. But here's the other part. You don't know what will be the reunification site. That's not determined ahead of time. Okay. Well, you can determine it ahead of time, but often you'll be wrong, because the fire department, the police, depending upon the situation, might say that the working perimeter around the location, around the school, you thought it was going to be 2 blocks. And maybe that's what the fire department anticipated when they met with you or somebody 10, 12 years ago in the organization to come up with a reunification site. Said, yeah, no matter what it would be, it may be like, if you got beyond 2 blocks, that would be reasonable to start looking for your reunification site. Well, today it's larger. Like we just know, the reunification site is going to be 6 blocks out, 8 blocks out, might be even more. There might be a mass evacuation. For example, if there's a fire at a chemical plant or something like that. So to practice and drill and have this specific location that then you have to abandon confuses people, because they think we should be going to this location. So do they start departing to that location during the disaster evacuation instead of waiting at their location? Do you all of a sudden realize, oh my goodness, like this class already started going to wherever and they can't be there because that is within the perimeter. So now we've got to figure out how to get them away from there and to the actual reunification site. And it can get really complicated. Think about parents. If you've identified a reunification site ahead of time and you have a sentinel event happen at a school, like a school shooting, parents are going to race to the school. They're going to race to other school buildings also if they have children located at those locations, but they will also race to the reunification site. So there are many reasons to not identify a reunification site ahead of time. This comes in as what is known as working the problem, Apollo 13. is an example of working the problem. You don't anticipate ahead of time of that scenario is going to happen. And when it happens, you have to say, here's what we know, here's the situation, here's the resources we have, and then we have to work the problem to come to a solution. That's what law enforcement and responders will do in a crisis situation. They're going to work the problem, they're going to come to a solution, they will identify an evacuation site, which is beyond the perimeter and also probably that could be readily accessed, for example, by parents. They will identify that. It's not going to take them more than a few minutes to identify this is what we are going to establish for a perimeter, and here is the area that we are going to use for a reunification site. And once that is done, if you have a W3W code, okay, what 3 words? If you have your what 3 words code, it can be assigned that specific reunification site. Well, it's already assigned, but you can say, right here, this set of doors on this building has this code to it, okay? And that's where we want people to go. Again, this will become fairly ubiquitous. The app is free. This will be incorporated into GPS systems where this will become very familiar. Like in 5 years from now, anybody listening to this or reading the blog post will be like, yes, yeah, totally am familiar with that technology. So, but imagine you have 2 situations here. One is if you give an address, you can enter coordinates and you can get to an address, but that still doesn't tell you what set of doors to go in. What if it's a really big building and you're parked in a certain area? And you would assume there's going to be people there to maybe help guide you to where you need to go, but that might not be the case at all. So you can identify a specific set of doors that you want parents or guardians to arrive at as this reunification process is underway. This is actually the number one way that I believe this software will positively impact school safety. And if you can wipe that section out of your planning that is reunification, in finding sites and maintaining sites, if you can get rid of that altogether and save that time and tell parents ahead of time. This is where I advocate for all schools should do a start of school evening meeting where they invite parents in the community, record it so it's available, put it on your website for the induction process. But you talk about the core things that your school would do in the event of a school shooting, if it was a tornado, whatever weather-related event. But just saying, here's what we would do. Now, not to a specific level where you're basically giving your playbook out to everybody in the audience. And this isn't also an opportunity for audience participation saying, well, I think you should do it this way. That's like a different meeting. That's more focus, group advisory committee things to work through stuff like that. This is basically saying, here's what we know. If there is a school shooting, parents typically will race to the school, and that adds to congestion of the roads near the school, makes it harder for responders to get there. We want responders, obviously, to be able to access the site. So you are not going to be allowed into the school to pick up your child. Anyway, there will be a hard perimeter that police will set up very close, and that perimeter will be pushed out. But please do not race to the scene. Please do not race to the scene. We will give you updates. Every so many minutes, you'll have regular updates from the school. It'll come out on the website of how to get those updates, whether it's going to be through the text messaging system, plus on the school website, plus through media. But we will have this. You'll have regular updates. we will identify an area that you can go for staging, a wait area, which might not be the reunification area, but maybe that there is an area they identify, and we'll say, you can go there. And then the reunification site, we will let you know specifically where that site will be and where you need to go. Again, that what set of doors. But we are not going to know any of this until we are working the problem. We are working the problem. We will get this information out to you. We also ask, for example, that you don't stream, the events and as you're coming into facilities for reunification to, pick up your children and things like that. We would ask for confidentiality, a call for decency, basic human decency. You can't, restrict somebody from recording behind a perimeter, but I think ahead of time, if you can talk to people about this, say, what you're going to do is just bring more people into that setting. And this is also a very sensitive situation because people feel they need to record, they need to take pictures, they need to archive. So you talk about that at the beginning, and then if something happens, people remember, it's not going to help if I drive toward the school. You'll still have some people who will do that. You'll have some people, though, who won't. You will have people who will be expecting a communication from the school on a staging location and a possible reunification site if that's warranted. So people will remain calm. They will. This is how this works, actually. If you tell people ahead of time what to expect, and pretty close to that is what you're delivering. It's called the transference dynamic. I talk about it in my book, Lessons of Lower Manhattan, and it works. It's very effective. So that's what I would encourage. Also, so I talked about how this is going to have a massive benefit for a reunification site. Another area is going to be mapping a school campus. Think about how this could have benefited the response in 1999 to the Columbine High School shooting. So instead of having just an address of having the school, every area of that school campus, every 81-foot square. So a huge benefit. Now we do label entrances to schools and things like that, but what about, playgrounds and parking lots and things like that? We can get very specific by using this type of system. And then also, as we are navigating first responders, police into the scene, we know exactly where to pinpoint those individuals and then also where to pinpoint other assets coming into the scene to support that situation. So I will have the representative from What Three Words specifically talk about that. Again, these are early ways that I see the software integrating into school safety in the United States. But immediately, if this can be a software to identify the reunification site, it simplifies the burden that is put on the school safety coordinator of keeping the safety plans up to date and keeping these reunification sites up to date, whether it be with supplies, goods, making sure that the keys still work. Hey, it's been sold to somebody else, so now it has a different set of keys, and you have to make sure that they're in agreement with using it as a site. And again, this will come together. These things do come together, part of working the problem. So What Three Words claims, and I do believe them, that it will always be free for individuals to use, and the apps will be free. They do have paid versions of this, obviously, if you're delivering products and things like that. They also do have a free usage plan for nonprofits. So I'll ask more about that because we have had Cajun Navy Relief and Triton Relief's Katie Pashon on the Safety Doc Show talking about rescues following hurricanes and how the 501c3s are involved in that. So I did send a message out to Katie asking if she was aware of the What Three Words app and just the whole service provided by What Three Words. Have not heard back from her yet, but it seems like that would make sense, that would be something she would be interfacing with in the rescue dispatching that she does right now with Triton Relief Group. So as we close out this episode of the Safety Doc podcast, I want to go over some of the parts of Lessons of Lower Manhattan, which will be released this spring. It is going to be through Publishing House, Rowman and Littlefield. Here we go. Lessons of Lower Manhattan. I'm going to move it over here. There we go. The manuscript will be the book will be about 200 pages. It is spot on if you are a school administrator or a parent wants to understand more about school safety and really the interworkings of the school safety industry. There is this belief that you can fortify your way to safety, which I challenge in the book because I do not adhere to that belief. One of the examples in the book was that schools could protect themselves from car attacks, or basically having a car run over students or ram into the front doors and into a school building by putting up bollards, which they have a metal casing and then they're filled with concrete, and you've seen them for years in front of things that you don't want hit, like gas meters. You want to have those protected, and so nobody accidentally backs into them. And they'll put them in front of buildings where heavy machinery, like fire departments, will often have them in. So if you're backing up, it's better to tap into a bollard than it is to knock out the side of the garage entrance. So those have specific purposes in those aspects. But when I'm referring to bollards in the school environment, they're being put up all over the place, in front of schools, on school sidewalks, and we're not seeing attacks where people are taking cars up and down school sidewalks, and we're not seeing people smashing through the front door of schools to attack children. So we talk about bollards, and I found in my research a very fascinating article. It was written by Pete Medic. It talked about MEDEK, talked about trail bollard hazards. And he's a bicyclist and wrote about, in the United States, the number of deaths and maiming caused by bicyclists running into bollards on trails. An experienced bicyclist. He's had his own close calls. He's talked about friends who've lost their lives, and also said this is really underreported stuff. So you would think, wow, that's why is that happening? But it's very hard to judge distance. I've experienced this myself as a bicyclist, going past bollards on trails. And for example, if you're going out and you pass 30 of them and you're coming back, you have to pass those 30 one more time. But you might say, well, if they're in front of you and you see them, why can't you get out of the way? Well, the problem is sometimes there are people in front of you, so you don't see the bollard. You just assume that the trail is going to be open, like when they pass. And suddenly they move aside, or a different bicyclist moves aside, and boom, there the bollard is. And you have very little time to respond. Now, it's not only bicyclists. This happens to rollerbladers. It also happens in races where people are running and they're behind somebody else and they're going down a path that has a bollard, and they don't see it in time and they run into it. And again, it can cause serious injury, has caused deaths. So we talk about bollards, and in Wisconsin, bollards in front of schools. Well, in winter, when we do have snow, you have to remove the snow. It's hard to get the snow away from these things, so it tends to ice up, tends to drift. They also tend to cast, shadows. So the shadows can be areas that get icy. So you have a whole bunch of problems here, which are created by implementing something to solve a problem which really wasn't a problem, meaning the problem of cars going up onto the walkways and slamming into schools. So, but now you have genuine problems with people with wheelchairs, people having to deal with icy pavement because you haven't been able to clean off the cement as well as you could if the bollards weren't there. If you have a lot of people and someone is in front of them and they move to the side, you could end up running into a bollard. And if you're going at a faster pace, it could cause some serious damage. So again, the trail bollard hazard. There was a study from the National Transportation Association, highways, and I cited it in my book, Lessons of Lower Manhattan. And specifically, it was talking about how this is underreported and it is becoming a more significantly recognized issue, bollards. And we're not even talking bollards for school safety, just in general, like on paths and bike and walkways and stuff like that. And this is something where when you install a bollard, that's very invasive. I mean, you're drilling down, you're sinking it into concrete. So to remove a camera from a school, for example, doesn't take long. To remove a bollard from in front of a school can be a massive, expensive process. So how do you get these things out? They're less expensive to put in often than they are to take out. So you also have an issue of putting something in that's a fortification that is not easy to remove. So some other questions and points that came up as I was going through. So what I did is I wrote down, so far I have 33 kind of either points I learned or questions that have been surfaced by the book. And I'll probably have a few more. And then I've got headings where I'll put these underneath. And basically these are for interviews. When people talk about the book, I'll get this out ahead of time. So they specifically can ask some questions. For example, like a question, hey, chaos seems like that would be something we would want to avoid, but you're saying that chaos and often more chaos is good during a crisis situation. So explain that. Yeah, okay, I can tell you about that. Another thing that I have in my question set and I emphasize in the book is this approach of accepting suboptimal outcomes to get eventually to what would be your optimal outcome. Here's an example. So you want to fly from here. I want to fly right now to California. I want to fly out to Los Angeles. So I want to fly from Madison, Wisconsin to Los Angeles. And I realized that when I get to, for example, Chicago, so my first stop, there's a cancellation because of weather, and I can't go from Chicago out to Los Angeles. Okay. But I'm told you can go to Dallas, and from Dallas you can go to Phoenix, and from Phoenix you can then go up to Los Angeles. Okay, well that works. So now there's a whole bunch of suboptimal outcomes. Like, do I decide to go down to Dallas? This will take me longer, and it's not a guarantee that the next option will be there. But I think it's going to get me closer to my optimal outcome, which is Los Angeles. So it's this being flexible. And if everything gets crazy, it's like, well, maybe we can take you from Phoenix and then we can land at Bakersfield. And from Bakersfield, you can take a bus to Los Angeles. The bus will take you 4 hours, but this plan will work. It'll get you to where you need to go. Would you do it? I don't know. You might if it works out for you. But definitely going to Bakersfield will be a suboptimal outcome, but it gets you closer to your optimal outcome. You have to weigh that. And then the bus, you have to transfer your luggage. It's a longer ride. The bus isn't probably as convenient as the plane is. But again, do you weigh it out? It's going to get you closer. It's going to take 4 hours of your time, though. So this whole thing of optimal outcomes is very important because we tend to seek the immediate optimal outcome. So basically being so linear that we think everything that happens has the one accepted reaction or response. And we don't realize there's many different ways to kind of get to this desired outcome. So that's my point with talking about suboptimal outcomes. So just imagine as we get software like this, we're also going to know much more about where we are relative to other areas in our environment. It's going to help us navigate better too. So as we wind up the show, again, an appreciation out to everybody who has been terrific to work with on Lessons of Lower Manhattan. Yvette Claire Jean with the New York City Department of Planning, oh my goodness, would contact me at night. So I am Central Time. So if I get contacted by 7 from her, she's in New York, so it's 8 o'clock their time, saying, is this what you need? Check your email. I just sent over some images. I just sent over some reports. I'd requested permission to use different things, going through that process, having the permission granted to use those different resources within the book. Still owned, of course, by New York City, but permission given to use in the book. They were phenomenal to work with. The people willing to do read-throughs of the book, Dr. Paul Rapp, head of military medicine. I sent Dr. Rapp a section of maybe 40 pages that talked about chaos and simulated annealing, and he is the expert in these areas. Nova specials, but he has been so giving of his time and energy and suggestions. I sent this and said, if you have an opportunity in the next 7 to 10 days to look over these specific points, I'd like your opinion if the way that I'm representing this is aligned to your interpretation, or if it's something I'm different, something I can look at, some other research you can steer me to. And literally, I'd get up in the morning at 5 o'clock and I'd check, and I'd already have a message in my inbox. And it would be from Paul, and he'd say, hey, I read everything. This, and this, a little bit of outline. Excellent. Here's some ideas. I would move this to this. I think your interpretation here, I would modify a little bit to this. And here's like another study that you probably want to read through because it will give you more depth into this section. And I'm like, you've had this for like 8 hours. And like, you are the head of military medicine. So thank you, the people out there that are so giving.
His sermon short because the parish leaves starts born on Sunday morning. Go through the snow side by each all in a row. Drive down to Lambeau, park the Pinto, fire up the rubber in any kind of weather. Pop a beer and eat a deer, then have a broad and sour song, dance the backer polka. Tick off God, but even he knows how outside are 40 years off tickets sold to go and watch the green and gold.
This has been the Safety Doc Podcast with author, radio show host, and leading safety expert, Dr. David Peroni. Remember to check back each week for the latest, best, and most bizarre practices in safety preparation and crisis response. You can find Dr. Perodin on Twitter @SafetyPhD. And remember, the truth will keep you safe.